A dying canine puppy hugs his handler before the final injection. But then the vet notices something strange. What should have been a heartbreaking goodbye suddenly twists into a chilling mystery. The puppy's body tells a different story. One that hints at betrayal, hidden danger, and a truth darker than anyone could have imagined. The handler's relief turns into fear, because if this pup wasn't dying naturally, someone wanted him gone. And stopping the injection was only the beginning. Who would want to silence a dog? What secret could he have uncovered? And how far will someone go to bury it forever? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the small veterinary clinic as Greer Lansing held her trembling canine partner close. Her auburn hair had fallen loose from its usual neat ponytail, and tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Rook, her black and tan shepherd mix, lay weakly in her arms on the cold metal exam table, his normally bright eyes now dulled with pain. "I can't believe this is happening," Greer whispered, her voice catching. She stroked Rook's soft fur, remembering how just last week he'd been charging through training exercises with boundless energy. Now here they were, facing what seemed to be the end of their journey together before it had truly begun. Dr. Rowan Kincaid moved quietly around the examination room, her weathered hands preparing the necessary injection with practiced care. The veterinarian's face showed the strain of years spent making difficult decisions, but something in her tired eyes flickered with uncertainty as she approached the table. "Are you sure you want to stay for this?" Dr. Kincaid asked gently, watching Greer clutch Rook closer. "I won't leave him," Greer replied firmly, though her lower lip trembled. "He deserves to have someone who loves him here at the end." The words felt like glass in her throat. Rook stirred slightly in her arms, pressing himself against her chest in what seemed like a desperate embrace. His breathing was labored, but there was something about the way he moved that caught Dr. Kincaid's attention. The vet paused, syringe in hand, and leaned in closer to examine the dog. "Wait a moment," Dr. Kincaid said suddenly, setting down the syringe. Her brow furrowed as she gently pulled back Rook's lips to examine his gums. "There's something strange here." Greer's heart jumped. "What do you mean?" Dr. Kincaid pulled a small pen light from her pocket and looked more closely. "These crystals along his gum line, I've seen something similar before, but not with typical renal failure." She leaned in and carefully sniffed Rook's breath, then pulled back with a sharp intake of air. "And that odor? What is it?" Greer asked, hope and fear warring in her chest. The veterinarian straightened up, her face grave. "I don't think this is natural kidney failure at all. These symptoms, the crystalline residue, the distinct smell, they're consistent with certain types of poisoning." Greer felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "Poisoning? But how? Who would—" "I can't be certain without running more tests," Dr. Kincaid said, already moving to gather supplies. "But I've seen similar cases before. This isn't the gradual organ failure we initially suspected. Someone may have deliberately poisoned Rook." Greer looked down at her partner, who still pressed against her despite his weakness. Her mind raced through the past few days, the training sessions, the meals, every moment that might hold a clue to when and how this could have happened. "We need to start treatment immediately," Dr. Kincaid continued, her movements now quick and purposeful. "If I'm right about the type of poison, we have a chance to save him, but we need to act fast." Greer stroked Rook's head, feeling the scar above his ear, a reminder of all they'd already overcome together. "Hang on, buddy," she whispered fiercely. "We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." The vet worked swiftly, drawing blood samples and hooking up an IV line. "I'm going to start him on activated charcoal and supportive fluids while we run these tests. If someone did this deliberately—" She met Greer's eyes. "You realize what this could mean?" Greer nodded slowly, her jaw set with determination. As both an officer and Rook's partner, she knew this wasn't just about saving her dog anymore. This was now potentially a criminal investigation. Someone had tried to kill her canine partner, and she was going to find out who and why. "What can I do to help?" Greer asked, still maintaining gentle contact with Rook as Dr. Kincaid worked. "Keep him calm and comfortable," the vet replied, efficiently connecting the IV line. "And start thinking about who might have had access to him in the past 24 to 48 hours. The sooner we can piece this together, the better chance we have of finding out what exact toxin we're dealing with." Rook whimpered softly, and Greer leaned down to press her forehead against his. "I'm here, boy. We're going to figure this out together." She felt him respond with a weak thump of his tail, and fresh tears sprang to her eyes. But this time, they were tears of determination rather than despair. The antiseptic smell of the clinic, which had moments ago seemed like a place of endings, now filled with renewed purpose and hope. Dr. Kincaid moved with focused efficiency, her earlier fatigue forgotten as she worked to save her patient's life. Through the clinic's windows, the Tennessee sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, marking not the end they'd feared, but the beginning of something entirely unexpected, a mystery that would require all of Greer's skills as both an officer and a partner to unravel. "Try to think about anything unusual in his routine lately," Dr. Kincaid said as she worked. "Any changes in his food, water, or training equipment? Anyone new who's been around him?" Greer's law enforcement training kicked in, her mind already cataloging recent events and interactions. "He's been eating the same food as always, drinking from his regular water bowl at the station." She paused, remembering something. "Though, yesterday he did seem reluctant to drink during training. I thought he was just being stubborn." Dr. Kincaid nodded, making notes. "That could be significant. Dogs often can detect something wrong with their water even before we can see or smell it." As the life-saving medications began to flow through Rook's IV, Greer felt him relax slightly in her arms. His breathing, while still labored, seemed less desperate. She knew they had a long night ahead of them, but at least now they had hope and a purpose. The quiet beeping of monitoring equipment filled the room as Dr. Kincaid continued her work, her weathered hands moving with gentle efficiency. The vet's discovery had not only saved Rook's life, but had also revealed something darker lurking in their small Tennessee community. Someone had tried to silence this promising young canine before he could fully begin his career, and Greer was determined to find out why. Outside the clinic windows, shadows lengthened across the parking lot as day faded into evening. But inside, under the bright fluorescent lights, the fight for Rook's life continued with renewed vigor, marking the beginning of a mystery that would test not only Greer's abilities as an officer, but also her faith in those around her. The wave of relief that had washed over Greer at Dr. Kincaid's discovery quickly turned to ice in her veins. Her mind raced back to that morning's training session, replaying every detail with growing unease. Rook had been perfect during the exercises, alert, focused, and determined as always. Sergeant Benton Crow had overseen the training, his immaculate uniform and rigid posture a stark contrast to his barely concealed disdain. She remembered how he'd watched them with cold eyes from across the training field, his square jaw set in disapproval. "A waste of department resources," he'd muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "That mutt will never make it as a proper K9, but Rook had proved him wrong, completing every task flawlessly. It wasn't until after their water break that everything went wrong. Within minutes, Rook had started stumbling, his usual grace deserting him. Now, in the harsh fluorescent light of Dr. Kincaid's clinic, the vet's words hung heavy in the air. These crystals around his gums, the distinctive odor. These aren't symptoms of natural kidney failure. Someone poisoned him. Greer's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. I have to report this. It happened on department property during official training. Dr. Kincaid nodded grimly while preparing an IV drip for Rook. Document everything. Take photos. I'll write up my findings. Within the hour, Sergeant Crow arrived at the clinic, followed by 2 other officers. His imposing figure filled the doorway as he surveyed the scene with obvious skepticism. "Officer Lansing," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you're causing quite a stir with these accusations." "They're not accusations, sir," Greer replied, standing straighter. "Dr. Kincaid found evidence of poisoning. Rook was fine until after the water break during training." Crow's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Listen to yourself. Are you suggesting someone in the department deliberately poisoned your washout of a K9? He turned to address the other officers. "This is exactly why I opposed bringing in handlers without proper experience. They get emotional, start seeing conspiracies where there's just natural selection at work." The other officers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. "The department has already invested too much in this experiment," Crow continued. "The humane thing would be to put the dog down and cut our losses. I'll authorize the expenses for euthanasia." Greer stepped between Crow and Rook's treatment area. "No." The word came out firm and clear, surprising even herself with its strength. "Excuse me?" Crow's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I said no. Rook is my partner, and he's been poisoned. That's a crime, and it happened under your supervision, Sergeant. I'm not authorizing euthanasia. I'm requesting a full investigation." The fluorescent lights buzzed in the tense silence that followed. Crow's face darkened as he took a step toward her. "Officer Lansing, you are way out of line. I'm giving you a direct order." "With all due respect, sir," Greer interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You don't have the authority to order the euthanasia of my K9 partner without proper cause. Dr. Kincaid has confirmed this isn't natural illness, and I'm exercising my right to protect my partner and request an investigation through proper channels." Dr. Kincaid stepped forward, holding up her preliminary report. "I've documented the symptoms and collected samples for testing. Officer Lansing is correct. This appears to be a deliberate poisoning." Crow's mask of authority cracked for just a moment, revealing something darker underneath. "This is ridiculous. You're all letting emotions cloud your judgment." He turned to the other officers. "Document this insubordination. Officer Lansing is clearly unfit for K9 handling duties." But Greer stood her ground, one hand resting protectively on Rook's fur. "I'll take this up with the chief if necessary, but Rook stays under treatment, and I want answers about what happened during that training session." "You're making a serious mistake," Crow growled, jabbing a finger in her direction. "This won't end well for you or that worthless dog." "Is that a threat, Sergeant?" Greer asked quietly, meeting his gaze. The tension in the room was palpable as they stared each other down. Finally, Crow turned on his heel and stormed out, the other officers trailing in his wake. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by the sharp slam of the clinic's front door. Dr. Kincaid let out a long breath. "You just made a powerful enemy." "I already was his enemy," Greer replied, gently stroking Rook's head as he whimpered softly. "He's hated us both since day one. But now I know why." She looked down at her partner, seeing the fight for life in his eyes despite the poison wreaking havoc in his system. Rook wasn't failing. He was getting too good at his job. And that scared someone enough to try to kill him. The quiet beeping of medical monitors filled the room as Dr. Kincaid continued Rook's treatment. Outside the window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, a fitting backdrop to the battle lines that had just been drawn. Greer knew she'd just placed herself squarely in Crow's crosshairs, but looking at Rook's trusting eyes, she knew she'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Whatever came next, she would fight for her partner, no matter the cost. Dr. Rowan Kincaid's fingers trembled slightly as she held up the lab results under the harsh fluorescent lights of the veterinary clinic. Her usually calm demeanor showed, signs of distress as she turned to face Greer, who sat beside Rook's treatment bed, her hand never leaving his fur. "This isn't good, Greer," Kincaid said, her voice tight. "The tests show something far worse than we initially thought. There's evidence of antifreeze poisoning, but it's not just a single incident. The toxicology report shows repeated exposure over several weeks." Greer's heart seemed to stop for a moment. She looked down at Rook, who lay quietly on the bed, connected to IV fluids. His brown eyes met hers with unwavering trust. "What do you mean, repeated exposure? See these markers here?" Kincaid pointed to several highlighted areas on the report. "They indicate chronic exposure. Someone's been giving him small doses over time, but that's not all." She pulled out another paper. "We found traces of a specific additive in his blood. It's a commercial-grade antifreeze marker that's only used in certain facilities, specifically auto shops and tow yards." The pieces started falling into place in Greer's mind. Her hands began to shake as she remembered Sergeant Crow's smirk when Rook had first gotten sick. "Crow's in-laws own the biggest tow yard in the county," she whispered. "There's more," Kincaid continued, pulling up a chair. "This type of additive isn't commonly available. It's a specialty product used mainly by larger operations. I called a contact at the supplier. Only 3 businesses in the county use it. The Crow family tow yard is one of them." Greer stood up suddenly, startling both Kincaid and Rook. 2 weeks ago, during a routine building sweep, Rook alerted, in Crow's office. He got really excited about something in his desk drawer. She began pacing, her boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. Crow laughed it off, said Rook was just a washout who couldn't tell the difference between drugs and his lunch leftovers. "But Rook's never been wrong about an alert, has he?" Kincaid asked quietly. "Never." Greer stopped pacing and looked at her partner. "Not once. And the day after that incident was when he first started showing symptoms." She ran her hands through her hair in frustration. "I thought it was just stress or maybe something he ate. But now," Kincaid nodded grimly, "the timing fits perfectly with the test results. The first major dose appears to have been administered right around then." Rook whimpered softly, and Greer immediately returned to his side, scratching behind, his ears just the way he liked. "Crow must have panicked when Rook alerted in his office. He knew my boy had found something he couldn't let come to light. The poisoning wasn't just about getting rid of a K9 he didn't approve of," Kincaid concluded. "This was about covering something up, something big." Greer felt her throat tighten as she remembered all the times Crow had pushed for Rook to be removed from the program, how he'd constantly undermined their training, and how quickly he'd advocated for euthanasia when Rook got sick. "He's been trying to discredit us from the start, but when that didn't work, when Rook proved himself too good at his job, he tried to eliminate the threat permanently," Kincaid finished. The magnitude of what they were discovering settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about a sergeant who didn't believe in Rook's abilities or Greer's competence. This was about corruption, about criminal activity so significant that Crow had been willing to slowly poison an innocent animal to protect his secrets. "We need to document everything," Kincaid said, pulling out her phone to take pictures of the lab results. "Every test, every result, every connection to that tow yard, and Greer?" She waited until the young handler met her eyes. "You need to be extremely careful. If Crow was willing to do this to Rook—" "I know," Greer said, her jaw set with determination. "But he made a mistake. He thought poisoning Rook would eliminate evidence, but instead he just created more. And now we have proof linking him directly to the attempt on Rook's life." Rook lifted his head slightly, his tail giving a weak thump against the bed. Despite his condition, his eyes remained alert and focused on his partner. Greer leaned down to press her forehead against his. "What do we do now?" she asked. not taking her eyes off her dog. Kincaid began gathering the lab reports into a folder. First, we continue Rook's treatment. The fact that we caught this and identified the specific type of poison means we can target our approach better. Then we need to take this evidence to someone we can trust, someone above Crow's pay grade. The state police, Greer suggested. They've been sniffing around some of our recent drug busts anyway. Something about inconsistencies in the evidence logging. That fits, Kincaid said. If Crow's involved in something illegal, it would explain why certain cases might have documentation issues. She paused, studying Greer carefully. Are you ready for what this might mean? Going up against a decorated sergeant isn't going to be easy. Greer straightened up, her hand still resting protectively on Rook's back. He tried to kill my partner to cover up his crimes. He's been poisoning him for weeks, watching him suffer, all while pretending to be concerned about department resources. Her voice hardened. I'm not just ready. I'm determined. No one hurts my dog and gets away with it. Rook made a soft sound of agreement, pushing his nose into Greer's hand. Even sick, even fighting the poison in his system, he was still trying to support his partner, still showing his unwavering loyalty. All right then, Kincaid said, closing the folder with a decisive snap. I'll make copies of everything and secure the original samples and test results in our safe. You focus on keeping Rook stable and watching your back. And Greer? She waited until she had the handler's full attention. Don't let Crow know we've figured this out. The element of surprise might be our best advantage right now. Greer nodded, her expression grim but determined. She looked down at Rook, who gazed back at her with complete trust, despite all he'd been through. The sight of his unwavering faith strengthened her resolve. What had started as a fight to save, her partner had just become something much bigger, a battle against corruption that ran deep in her department. But with Rook by her side and the truth emerging piece by damning piece, she was ready to face whatever came next. The evening shadows lengthened across the veterinary clinic as Greer, Kincaid, and their small group of allies gathered in the back office. Piper Greeley, the kennel technician, nervously twisted her blonde braid while Ezra Vale's broad shoulders filled the doorframe as he kept watch. We need to make this look completely real, Kincaid said, spreading out blank forms on her desk. The euthanasia paperwork has to be perfect. Crow will check every detail. Piper nodded, pulling out her phone. I've got photos of all our standard forms. The timestamps, the signatures. Everything has to match our usual protocol. Ezra moved, away from the door, his firefighter's badge catching the light. My cabin's ready. It's remote enough that no one will spot him there, and I've already stocked up on supplies. Greer knelt beside Rook, who lay on a blanket in the corner. Though still weak from the poisoning, his tail thumped against the floor when she scratched, behind his ears. Are you sure this will work? It has to, Kincaid replied, her voice firm. We'll document the procedure, complete with photos. Piper will witness it officially. Then, while everyone thinks Rook has been put down, we'll move him to Ezra's cabin to recover. The hardest part will be making it look real, Piper said softly. Especially for you, Greer. Crow needs to believe you're devastated. Greer's throat tightened. That won't be hard to fake. Every time I think about what he did to Rook. She stopped, fighting back tears of genuine anger. Ezra stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Channel that emotion. Use it. Make Crow believe he's won. They spent the next hour carefully orchestrating every detail. Kincaid prepared a series of syringes filled with harmless saline, matching the color and volume of actual euthanasia drugs. Piper arranged the clinic's examination room exactly as it would be for a real procedure, setting up the camera to document everything. Remember, Kincaid instructed, we need to make this look like a by-the-book euthanasia. Crow will want proof. Photos, paperwork, witnesses will give him everything he expects to see. Ezra had parked his truck behind the clinic, out of sight of the security cameras. They would transfer Rook there, hidden in a large crate, while officially removing an empty body bag through the front. As twilight deepened into night, they put their plan into motion. Piper called Crow, her voice carefully controlled as she informed him that Dr. Kincaid had agreed to perform the procedure. "Officer Lansing is here now," she said, the tremor in her voice entirely genuine, though not for the reasons Crow would assume. "We're just waiting for you, sir." Greer held Rook close, burying her face in his fur while they waited. The dog seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, staying perfectly still and quiet. Ezra positioned himself in the shadows near the back door, ready to move Rook the moment Crow was gone. When Crow arrived, his face showed appropriate professional concern, but Greer caught the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. He stood back, watching as Kincaid went through the motions of preparing for euthanasia. "I'm sorry it's come to this," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But it's the humane thing to do." Greer didn't have to fake the tears that spilled down her cheeks. Her anger and fear for Rook's safety, combined with her hatred for Crow's deception, made her emotional response completely genuine. Kincaid administered the saline injections with practiced precision, making each step look exactly like a standard euthanasia procedure. Rook, who had been carefully trained over the past few hours, played his part perfectly, gradually becoming still, his breathing slowing until it seemed to stop. Piper documented everything, her camera clicking at appropriate intervals. Her hands shook. Not from guilt, but from fury at having to participate in this charade while the real criminal stood watching. When Kincaid finally announced time of death, Greer broke down completely. Her sobs echoed through the clinic as she cradled Rook's seemingly lifeless body. The performance was so convincing that even Piper had to remind herself it wasn't real. Crow placed a hand on Greer's shoulder. It took everything in her power not to shake it off. "You did the right thing," he said. "I'll make sure this is noted in your file as a responsible decision." They waited until Crow's car disappeared into the night before springing into action. Rook immediately lifted his, head fully alert, and Ezra emerged from the shadows with the crate. "Quick now," Kincaid urged, helping them transfer Rook. "We don't know if he'll come back to check." Piper rushed to finish the paperwork while Ezra and Greer carefully moved Rook to the truck. The dog remained perfectly quiet, as if understanding the need for absolute secrecy. "I'll take care of him," Ezra promised as he helped Greer settle Rook in the crate. "My cabin's stocked with everything he needs. No one will find him there." Greer pressed her forehead against the crate's gate, meeting Rook's intelligent eyes. "I'll visit as often as I can without raising suspicion," she whispered. "You just focus on getting better." Kincaid appeared with a bag of medications and instructions. "Everything you need is here. Antibiotics, supplements, detailed care instructions. Keep him on the treatment plan, and he should make a full recovery." Ezra's truck disappeared into the night. Greer felt a mix of relief and determination settle over her. Rook was safe. Now they could focus on gathering evidence against Crow. The sergeant thought he'd won, thought he'd eliminated the threat. To his operation, his overconfidence would be his downfall. "Remember," Kincaid said quietly as they prepared to leave, "from this moment on, Rook is officially deceased. We all need to maintain that story absolutely. One slip, one mistake, and everything falls. Apart?" Piper nodded, clutching the completed paperwork. "I'll file these first thing tomorrow. By noon, it'll be official record." They parted ways in the parking lot, each heading in different directions to avoid suspicion. But they were united now in purpose, not just to save Rook, but to expose the corruption that had nearly killed him. The real work was just beginning. The morning after Rook's staged death, Greer noticed something wasn't right with her cruiser. The radio crackled with strange interference, and there was a faint buzz she'd never heard before. Following her instincts, she drove to a trusted mechanic, who discovered a listening device expertly hidden beneath her dashboard. Her stomach turned. Crow was watching her every move. Before she could process this violation, Control arrived at the station with a serious expression. "Officer Lansing, we need to discuss a complaint. Someone reported your K9 bit them during training last week." Greer's heart raced. "That's impossible. Rook is—" She caught herself. "Was never aggressive during training, and he's gone now." "Nevertheless, we have to investigate. The complaint is quite detailed." Control handed her the paperwork. The alleged incident date matched perfectly with their last training session, before Rook got sick. That evening, while doing paperwork at the kennel where she still worked with other K9s, Greer noticed a strange smell. Smoke. Then she saw orange flames licking up the walls. The fire spread with unnatural speed, blocking the main exit. She grabbed her phone to call for help, but the signal was dead. The smoke grew thicker, making it hard to breathe. The other dogs were barking frantically in their kennels. Through the haze, she could barely make out the emergency exit. But when she tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. Someone had chained it shut from the outside. Suddenly, there was a tremendous crash as the kennel's side wall splintered inward. Ezra appeared through the gap, his firefighting gear covered in soot. "Greer, this way!" She stumbled toward him, coughing violently. The heat was becoming unbearable, and the building's structure groaned ominously above them. Ezra grabbed her arm, pulling her through the opening he'd created. They barely made it 20 feet before the roof collapsed behind them. Safe but shaking, Greer watched the kennel burn. "He tried to kill me," she whispered, the reality of it hitting her hard. "Crow was willing to burn down the whole building with me inside." "The fire's too perfect," Ezra confirmed grimly, still holding her steady. "Multiple points of origin, blocked exits. This wasn't an accident. He's escalating because he's scared. Whatever you and Rook discovered, it must be big enough to risk murder." Emergency vehicles arrived, their lights painting the smoke-filled night in red and blue. As paramedics checked her for smoke inhalation, Greer caught Crow watching from the shadows, his face illuminated briefly by the flames. The message was clear. He would stop at nothing to keep his secret safe. The kennel fire changed everything. What started as an attempt to silence a perceptive K9 had evolved into something far more dangerous. Crow wasn't just trying to protect his operation anymore. He was willing to commit murder to keep whatever Rook had discovered hidden. As she sat in the back of the ambulance, breathing through an oxygen mask, Greer met Ezra's worried gaze. They both knew the stakes had risen dramatically. This wasn't just about saving Rook anymore or exposing corruption. Now it was about survival. The morning after the kennel fire, Piper Greeley stood among the charred remains, her boots crunching, on wet ash. The acrid smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. As she surveyed the destruction, something nagged at her memory. Something about Rook and a key. "Wait!" she called out to Greer and Ezra, who were documenting the damage. "Remember that old locker key Rook used to chew on during training? The one from the evidence storage building?" Greer's eyes widened with recognition. "The brass one with the scratches? I thought he'd lost it months ago." "He didn't lose it," Piper said, brushing soot from her uniform. "He buried it behind the kennel fence. I saw him dig it up several times like it was his special treasure." The three of them exchanged meaningful looks. Within minutes, they were at the partially melted chain-link fence where Piper pointed to a specific spot. Ezra borrowed a small garden trowel from his truck, and after a few minutes of careful digging, they found it. A tarnished brass key, with distinct teeth marks. "Number 273, Greer read from the worn etching. "That's in the old evidence wing." Using their legitimate access to the building, they made their way to the storage lockers. The key slid perfectly into locker 3. Inside, they found several evidence boxes labeled "Returned" in Crow's distinctive handwriting. "Look at these weights," Ezra whispered, pointing to the documentation. The initial seizure weight and the returned weight, they don't match. Every single box is lighter than when it was logged in. Greer pulled on latex gloves and carefully opened one of the boxes. The fentanyl packages inside showed signs of tampering. Tiny punctures sealed with clear tape. He's been bleeding off small amounts from each seizure, she said. Just enough to avoid immediate notice. Piper connected the dots. The tow yard. That's how he's moving it. When they impound vehicles from drug busts, he has complete access and privacy. The rare antifreeze additive we found in Rook's system is the same brand they use exclusively at Crow's in-law's yard. That's why Rook kept alerting in Crow's office, Greer said, her voice tight with anger. He wasn't being difficult or unreliable. Like Crow claimed, he was trying to tell us something was wrong. The scope of Crow's operation became clear. He wasn't just skimming from a few evidence boxes. He had created an entire system. Seized drugs would be logged, then partially emptied. The stolen portions would be moved through the tow yard, where vehicles provided perfect cover for distribution. The paperwork trail was manipulated to show everything had been properly returned or destroyed. This isn't just one corrupt officer, Ezra said grimly. This is systematic. The falsified weights, the evidence tags, the transport documentation. It would take multiple people to maintain this kind of cover-up. Greer carefully photographed everything with her phone. And Rook almost exposed it all with his nose. No wonder Crow was so determined to discredit him and get rid of him. They carefully returned everything exactly as they'd found it, making sure not to leave any trace of their discovery. As they left the evidence building, the weight of what they'd uncovered settled over them. Crow hadn't just tried to kill a dog. He was running a sophisticated drug trafficking operation right under the department's nose, using the very systems meant to stop such crimes. The proof they'd found in Locker 273 wasn't just about Rook's poisoning anymore. It revealed a corruption that ran deep through multiple levels of law enforcement and local business. What had started as one handler's fight to save her canine partner had uncovered something far more sinister. Dawn crept over. The horizon, as Greer sat cross-legged on Ezra's cabin floor, papers and photos spread before her like puzzle pieces. Rook lay beside her, his breathing finally steady after days of following Dr. Kincaid's careful antidote protocol. The IV line was out, and color had returned to his gums. Every few minutes, Greer would pause her planning to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "We've got to be smart about this," she murmured, more to herself than to Rook. One shot to get it right. Dr. Kincaid had provided detailed notes on the distinctive coolant additive found in Rook's system, a specialty brand sold exclusively through Crow's in-law's tow yard. It was their first solid lead, but they needed more. Ezra entered with 3. Steaming cups of coffee, passing one to Greer and another to Piper, who sat nearby reviewing security footage from the kennel fire. "I've been thinking," Ezra said, settling onto the worn couch. "If Rook's well enough, we could set up a controlled scent lineup, use samples from different vehicles, including Crow's truck. If Rook can consistently identify that specific additive..." Greer's eyes lit up. That would establish a direct connection. She turned to Rook, who perked up at her attention. "What do you think, buddy? Feel up for some work?" Rook's tail thumped against the floor in response. The next morning, they carefully arranged 5 identical containers in Ezra's backyard. 4 held coolant samples from random vehicles at the firehouse. The 5th contained a swab from under Crow's truck, collected by Piper during a routine maintenance check. Greer led Rook through 3 separate lineups, changing the position of the samples each time. Without hesitation, Rook indicated Crow's sample every single time, sitting precisely in front of it as he'd been trained. "Good boy," Greer praised, her voice thick with pride. She turned to where Kincaid stood filming the proceedings. "Did you get all that?" The vet nodded. "Every second. But we still need to prove where he's moving the drugs." As if in answer, Rook suddenly lifted his head, nose working the air. He walked to the edge of the yard, staring intently toward the river that bordered Ezra's property. "What is it, boy?" Greer asked, coming to stand beside him. Through the trees, they could just make out a small shed on the riverbank, its weathered boards almost invisible against the surrounding foliage. "That's county property," Ezra said quietly. "Used to store river rescue equipment, but it's been empty for years. Or it's supposed to be." Greer's pulse quickened. "Rook, want to check it out?" They approached carefully, Ezra and Piper hanging, back to watch the perimeter while Greer and Rook circled the structure. The dog's behavior changed dramatically as they neared the door. His posture stiffened, and he indicated strongly, just as he had during training for drug detection. "We need surveillance on this place," Greer whispered when they regrouped. "If Crow's using it?" "Already on it," Piper said, pulling small cameras from her pack. "These are motion-activated. We'll know the second anyone goes near that shed." They didn't have to wait long. Just after midnight, Greer's phone buzzed with an alert. The team gathered around her screen, watching as a familiar figure approached the shed with a flashlight. Crow worked quickly, transferring boxes from the shed to his truck. "Got you," Greer breathed, her hand finding Rook's fur. The dog leaned against her leg, both of them steady and sure as they watched justice finally coming within reach. By dawn, they had hours of footage showing multiple trips, all time-stamped and clear. Combined with the chemical evidence and Rook's documented identification of the coolant additive, they finally had enough to take to a judge. "This is it," Greer said, gathering their evidence into a secure folder. She knelt beside Rook, taking his face in her hands. "You did it, partner. You never gave up even when they tried to stop you. Even when they tried to kill you." Rook's deep brown eyes met hers, with unwavering trust, and he pressed his forehead to hers in their familiar gesture of connection. In that moment, Greer felt the weight of the past weeks, the fear, the doubt, the desperate fight to save her, partner and expose the truth, begin to lift. They had their proof. Now it was time to make it count. The late afternoon sun slanted through Ezra's cabin windows as the team gathered around his weathered kitchen table. Pizza boxes and empty soda cans littered the surface, their impromptu celebration of finally gathering enough evidence against Crow. Rook lay curled at Greer's feet, his tail thumping occasionally against the floor. "I still can't believe we got it all on video," Piper said, grinning as she reached for another slice. "His face when we show that footage to the judge." Dr. Kincaid nodded, his usual professional demeanor relaxed for once. "The chemical analysis matches perfectly. There's no way he can explain that away." Ezra leaned back in his chair, stretching. "First thing tomorrow, we'll take everything to Judge Martinez. She's tough but fair. She'll issue the warrant." The sharp buzz of Greer's phone cut through their celebration. An unknown number. She stepped onto the porch to answer it, shivering slightly in the evening chill. "Hello? Missing something? Officer Lansing?" Crow's voice slithered through the speaker. Her blood ran cold. "What do you want, Crow?" "Check your messages." Her phone pinged. The photo showed Dr. Kincaid bound to a chair in what looked like an industrial space, a bruise darkening his cheek. Greer's head snapped up, but Kincaid wasn't at the table anymore. "When did he step out?" she demanded, bursting back inside. Piper and Ezra looked up, startled. "Maybe 10 minutes ago? Said he needed something from his car." Piper trailed off at Greer's expression. Crow's voice came back on the line. "Bring the dog to the old grain elevator. 1 hour. Come alone, or the good doctor won't make it home tonight." Inside, Rook suddenly collapsed, his body racked with familiar tremors. "No, no, no," Greer whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. His symptoms were back. The same glazed eyes, the same labored breathing. "He's relapsing," Piper cried, already reaching for her phone to call the emergency vet. Ezra checked Rook's food and water bowls, sniffing cautiously. "The water smells off." Someone tampered with it. Greer sat back on her heels, despair crushing her chest. Rook needed immediate treatment, and Kincaid was the only vet who knew the exact protocol. Without him, "We have to surrender," she said quietly. "I can't. Let either of them die. Wait!" Piper jumped up, her face lighting with sudden memory. "Last week, Kincaid showed me his emergency kit. He always keeps a spare antidote ampule in there, said it was just in case." She ran to Kincaid's medical bag, still sitting by the door from their last treatment session. After a frantic search, she held up a small glass vial triumphantly. "Here. He told me the dosage, too. Made me memorize it in case something happened to him." Hope flickered in Greer's chest as she watched Piper prepare the injection with steady hands. They could save Rook, and with him stable, they could focus on rescuing Kincaid. "Ezra, call dispatch. We need backup at that grain elevator," Greer ordered, her voice finding its strength again. "Crow's not walking away this time." As Piper administered the antidote, Rook's trembling gradually subsided. His breathing evened out, and his eyes cleared, fixing on Greer with that unwavering trust that had started this whole journey. "That's my good boy," she whispered, running her hands through his fur. "We're going to get him, Rook. We're going to finish this." The sun was setting now, painting the cabin walls in deep orange as they prepared for the confrontation ahead. Greer checked her weapon and vest, while Ezra coordinated with dispatch and Piper monitored Rook's vital signs. The antidote was working. They had a chance. But Greer couldn't shake the image of Kincaid, bound and helpless in that grain elevator. The man who had saved Rook's life, who had believed her when no one else would, was suffering because he'd helped her stand up to corruption. The weight of responsibility settled heavy on her shoulders as she watched the minutes tick down to Crow's deadline. The darkness gathering outside seemed to mirror her own internal struggle. If anything happened to Kincaid. But no. She squared her shoulders, drawing strength from Rook's steady presence at her side. They had overcome every obstacle Crow had thrown at them so far. They would overcome this one too. They would save Kincaid. They would bring Crow to justice. They would finish what they started. But first, they had to survive the next hour. The grain elevator loomed against the darkening sky, its weathered silhouette a stark reminder of more prosperous farming days. Greer and Ezra crouched behind an abandoned truck, studying the building's layout. Rook stayed perfectly still beside them, his training keeping him silent despite the tension crackling in the air. "Two main entrances," Ezra whispered, pointing to the rusted metal doors. "Loading dock on the east side, personnel door on the west. Upper levels have those narrow walkways running between the silos." Greer nodded, noting how the security lights cast deep shadows across the concrete. "The auger controls are in the main processing room. That's where he'll be. It's the only space big enough to move around in." They had 20 minutes left before Crow's deadline. Backup was positioned discreetly along the perimeter, but Greer knew they couldn't risk a direct assault, not with Kincaid's life hanging by a thread. "I'll go in first," she said, checking her weapon one final time. "You circle around to the mechanical room. If we can shut down that auger—" "Be careful," Ezra cut in, his eyes serious. "Crow's desperate now. That makes him more dangerous than ever." Rook pressed against her leg, and Greer drew strength from his steady presence. Together, they'd survived poisoning, fire, and betrayal. They would survive this too. The personnel door creaked slightly as Greer eased it open. The interior was dimly lit by scattered emergency lights, casting an eerie glow across the dusty equipment. The rumble of the running auger echoed through. The building, Crow's insurance policy against anyone trying to sneak up on him. Greer moved forward cautiously, Rook matching her step for step. Years of training together made them move as one unit, perfectly synchronized. The dog's ears were pricked forward, alert for any sound above the mechanical drone. They reached the main processing room. Through the doorway, Greer could see Kincaid, tied to a support beam near the active auger. The vet's face was bruised, but his eyes were clear and defiant. Crow stood nearby, his service weapon trained steadily on Kincaid's head. "That's far enough," Crow called out as Greer appeared in the doorway. "Where's the mutt?" "Right here," Greer answered, stepping fully into view with Rook at her side. "Let Dr. Kincaid go, Crow. It's over." "Nothing's over," Crow snarled. He gestured with his gun toward a spot near his feet. "Bring the dog here, now, or the good doctor gets to find out what happens when you fall into an running auger." Greer forced herself to remain calm, though her heart was hammering. She needed to keep him talking, give Ezra time to reach the controls. "Why'd you do it, Crow? The drug trafficking wasn't enough? You had to try to kill an innocent dog? Innocent?" Crow barked out a harsh laugh. "That thing was going to ruin everything. Regular dogs, they just alert on command. But this one?" He glared at Rook. "This one actually smells things he's not supposed to. Should have known better than to let a bleeding heart like you train him." "He's a good dog," Greer said firmly. "That's why you couldn't stand him, isn't it? Because he exposed the truth about you?" "The truth?" Crow's voice rose. "The truth is that people like you and your precious vet here don't understand how things really work. Sometimes you have to bend the rules. Sometimes—" A metallic screech cut through his words as the auger suddenly ground to a halt. Crow's head snapped toward the sound, and in that split second of distraction, Rook launched himself forward. The Shepherd Mix's powerful jaws clamped onto Crow's gun arm, throwing off his aim as shots rang out. The bullets sparked off metal beams as Greer tackled Crow from the other side. They crashed to the concrete floor in a tangle of limbs. Crow fought like a cornered animal, landing a solid punch to Greer's ribs that drove the breath from her lungs. But she held on grimly, using her training to maintain control of his gun hand, while Rook kept his other arm pinned. Ezra's footsteps pounded across the floor as he ran to help. Together, they managed to subdue Crow long enough for Greer to get the handcuffs on him. As she clicked them shut, she heard the welcome sound of backup units pouring into the building. "Officer down," she called out, more from habit than actual injury. "Suspect in custody. We need medical for Dr. Kincaid." Crow lay face down on the concrete, still struggling despite the restraints. "You don't understand," he spat. "I was doing what had to be done." "No," Greer said firmly as other officers took control of him. "You were doing what was easy. What had to be done was stopping you." She turned away from him to help Ezra untie Kincaid, while Rook stood guard, his posture alert but calm. The vet's wrists were raw from the ropes, but he managed a tired smile. "Nice timing," he said hoarsely. "Though I have to say, I prefer my usual patience to this sort of excitement." "You okay?" Greer asked, checking his injuries as paramedics approached. Kincaid nodded. "Nothing that won't heal, thanks to you and Rook here." He reached out to pat the dog's head. "Guess we're even now, buddy. You saved my life after I saved yours." Rook's tail wagged once, acknowledging the praise while maintaining his protective position. Even now, he stayed focused on his duty, just as he had from the very beginning. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Greer sat in the front row of the packed courtroom. Her bruises from the grain elevator fight had faded, but the memories remained sharp. Beside her, Rook lay at attention, his dark eyes fixed on Crow as the former sergeant stood before the judge in his orange jumpsuit. "The state of Tennessee versus Benton Crow," the bailiff announced, "on charges of drug trafficking, attempted murder, animal cruelty, evidence tampering, and corruption under color of authority. The proceedings moved swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming. The doctored evidence logs, surveillance footage from the Riverside shed, toxicology reports from the antifreeze poisoning, and testimony from Crow's own accomplices who had turned state's evidence to save themselves. 3 of Crow's fellow officers were also indicted, along with 2 employees from the tow yard. The investigation had exposed a web of corruption stretching back 5 years. Over $2 million worth of seized drugs had been redirected through their network, leaving countless families devastated by the flood of fentanyl into their communities. When the judge announced the verdict, guilty on all counts, Greer felt Rook press against her leg. She scratched behind his ears, remembering how close she'd come to losing him. "We did it, buddy," she whispered, the cleanup within. The department was extensive. Internal Affairs launched a thorough review of every case Crow and his accomplices had touched. New oversight protocols were implemented. Fresh faces filled the vacated positions, bringing with them a commitment to integrity that the community desperately needed. 2 weeks after the trial, Greer stood in the department's main conference room, surrounded by her colleagues and supporters. Chief Martinez approached the podium, his usual stern expression softened by a rare smile. "Officer Lansing," he began, "your dedication and courage in exposing this corruption has restored faith in our department. It gives me great pleasure to announce your promotion to Senior Canine Handler with supervisory responsibilities for our expanded canine program." Applause filled the room as Greer accepted her new badge. Her eyes found Piper in the crowd, beaming with pride, and Ezra, who offered a subtle wink that made her cheeks warm. "And now," the chief continued, "we have a special ceremony to perform." He gestured to where Rook sat perfectly positioned beside Greer. "In recognition of extraordinary service, we're officially swearing in Rook as a full member of our K-9 unit." Dr. Kincaid stepped forward, carrying a new leather collar with polished department credentials. As she fastened it around Rook's neck, her hands lingered for a moment. "From almost losing you to this," she murmured. "You're one remarkable dog." The formal ceremony concluded with photographs and congratulations, but Greer found herself drawn to a quiet corner where Ezra waited. The firefighter's steady presence had become a comfort she hadn't expected. "You clean up nice in that dress. Uniform," he said softly. "Better than covered in grain dust and auger grease," she replied with a small laugh. "I don't know. That was pretty impressive, too." His expression grew serious. "You changed things here, Greer. Made it better." She thought about all the moments that had led to this. The fear, the doubt, the desperate gambles. "I had help," she said. "I couldn't have done it alone. No one should have to." His hand found hers, a gentle squeeze conveying everything words couldn't. Later, Greer sought out Kincaid in her clinic. The veterinarian was finishing up paperwork but set it aside when Greer entered. "I never properly thanked you," Greer began. "For believing me that first day. For risking everything to help us." Kincaid shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. What Crow was doing, it was wrong. Sometimes standing up for what's right means standing alone. But you showed us we don't have to." The two women shared a knowing look, their shared ordeal having forged a bond deeper than friendship. "Will you keep being Rook's vet?" Greer asked. "I don't trust anyone else with him." "Try and stop me," Kincaid replied with a warm smile. "That dog's family now." As the sun began to set, Greer walked through the department parking lot one last time that day. Her new badge caught the fading light, and Rook's tags jingled softly with each step. Officers nodded respectfully as they passed. No more whispers, no more doubt. She paused at her cruiser, taking in the moment. The fresh paint still gleamed where the K-9 unit designation had been updated with her new rank. Rook sat beside her, alert and ready as always. "Ready to go home, partner?" she asked. His tail wagged once, and he hopped into his specially equipped compartment without hesitation. Greer smiled, remembering the uncertain rookie who had once been deemed unfit for service. Now they were both exactly where they belonged. The cruiser pulled out of the lot as evening settled over the small Tennessee town. Changes were still coming, new policies to implement, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal. But for now, it was enough to know that justice had been served, and that sometimes the ones others dismiss as weak turn out to be the strongest of all. Rook's nose pressed against the barrier mesh, checking on her as he always did. Greer reached back to touch his paw briefly. Together, they had transformed not just themselves, but their whole department. And together, they would face whatever challenges came next. They drove home through familiar streets that somehow looked different now, cleaner, safer, full of possibility. The weak afternoon light caught Greer's new badge and Rook's official K9 tags, symbols of their vindication and the fresh start they had earned together. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.